Welcome to Virtualize Everything. Today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different as far as we're going to be doing a budget Proxmox server build. And this really could be a budget build on some other virtualization hardware or home lab hardware in general. But I purchased one of these systems back about a month ago, and it's the system we're looking at here. And as you can see, it was a pretty good deal. It was an i7 7700 with a 256 gig SSD and a 1 terabyte hard drive, as well as 16 gigs of RAM for $125. We ended up just around 150 all in. But when I got this system in, I found it to be a much better deal than I initially had anticipated. And I was very excited to bring this to you as a very good home virtualization budget build, as this system really is a what I feel a sweet spot, at least inside of my budget. And a lot of my peers that I talk to that are getting into doing home lab stuff, a lot of us are looking for fairly cost effective, low power consumption systems that we can go ahead and use for projects, small projects on and off, and some self hosting inside of our own network. Again, this video is a $200 build out of a Proxmox home lab server. It's meant to be a home lab server for experimenting, self hosting, and generally learning. It's not going to be your most high performance server system, but it's definitely going to be low on power consumption, or for you a decent amount of system resources and space to do things, and really fit the absolute low end of budget. All of my stuff is really made up here of hardware like this, and we're definitely not going to be self-building some high performance machine inside of this budget at all. I actually went ahead and purchased 3 more for the channel after I purchased this particular system. And today we're going to be starting with one of these systems, and there's a few differences here. The first system I purchased had a lot more contained in it as far as hard drives. It also had a CD-ROM and a few other things. So moving on, we're going to take a look here at the spec sheet for this ThinkCenter M710S that we pick up. And starting in the upper part of this screen, you can see that there are a various amount of CPU options that are available to us, and we definitely chose to go with the i7 7700, which is going to give us 8 available threads for virtualization. Now, a thread might not be as good as a core because it's actually a core shared, but it's the next best thing. So this system is basically going to be able to support 8 virtualized CPUs as far as Proxmox is concerned. And we're also going to support DDR4 up to 2400 megahertz. And our max capacity here is going to be 64 gigs of RAM. Now, these systems are coming in with a default of 16 gigs of RAM, but 16 gigs of RAM is really going to be a good spot for starting out if you're learning about Proxmox and want to self-host a few different things. Ultimately, especially with some of this system's other features, you're probably going to want to upgrade that to 32 or even 64. So if you get doing some like Windows hosting with light gaming or something like Chasm Web, you have a good amount of RAM to give to those users, but it's a good spot and we are able to upgrade to 64 gigs quite easily. And this system actually has 4 RAM slots, so it's not even super expensive to get up to that 64 gig mark. That's something that I find is very common in a lot of these lower end all in one systems is most of them I find only two RAM slots in. The next thing looking through this data sheet that we really want to take note of is the chipset, and it's a B25 chipset. What that's going to mean for us could be different, and it all depends on how much the end manufacturer has locked out this chipset and BIOS software. But in general, there's a possibility in looking at this chipset that we are going to have support for passing through PCI devices and doing IO isolation. It's called IOMMU inside of Proxmox, and AMD and Intel both have separate names for this. We are going to find out later, and that's what made this system so exciting, that we will have support for that. And that's what really set this system aside from some of the other builds in this price point, is the fact that we're going to have support for that. So that means that if we do a Windows VM, Chasm Web VM, or something like that, we're going to be able to give it a GPU. We're also, if we chose to do pfSense, we could pass through a Ethernet card and some other things. And since we have that capability, it's really going to be nice to have a decent amount of PCI, and definitely a PCI 16X slot. And if you come over here, you can see that we have 3 PCI slots, and one of them being a 16X, 2 of them being 1X, as well as some available M.2 slots and some USB 3.1 slots. So now let's go ahead and take a look at my actual system. And this is the actual system that we're going to open up here. You can notice it's one of the systems that doesn't have the CD-ROM, one of the later 3 I built. Quick note, we've done our last couple of videos on that first system that I bought and kind of just learning about the system. Let's go ahead and see what's involved in opening this system up and adding some hard drives, and generally just take a look at some pictures of what the IO and stuff looks like in this system, even though we just talked about that in the data sheet. So to open up this system, we're first going to flip it on the side. This system came in with only one rear thumb screw. There should be another one here, but this is definitely used hardware, and it's no surprise that it only came in with one. We're going to go ahead, back that thumb screw out and pull the rear panel off, and we're going to get something that looks like this. And even being fairly familiar with taking systems apart and having built a few of my own and stuff, I kind of was surprised how daunting this system looks. For a pre-built system, I expected a little bit better wire management and whatnot, and well, it is what it is. It's a cheap system. But to get this apart a little bit further, to find the RAM, find the hard drives, we're going to pull up gently on these 3 red clips here, and that's going to release the front face. The front face will then kind of pivot out as it separates. You can see it separated here. Don't pull it straight away. Let it kind of drift down towards the bottom of the system. It's on a hinge, and that hinge will allow it to release once it folds to about a 90-degree position. Now that we have this front face off, you can see the system's looking frontwards at us. We're going to have a clip right here and another button right here. I found if you press that button, it releases this one side, and the case kind of racks, and you can grab a hold of this switch and then pull up. Some of them I kind of had to get a little forceful with and kind of push this rotating tray backwards. I found them kind of snug and hard to operate. Again, this is a low budget system, and a little bit of clunky case design isn't really that big of a concern. I've definitely seen a lot worse cases. And overall, this case is extremely ruggedly built compared to some of the other cases I've worked with, even in like custom gaming industry and what. So as you can see here, here's a picture of that tray folded up, and you can see the spot for the CD-ROM and whatnot, and some of the available wires and lack thereof wire management on this motherboard. We're going to turn that system around so you can get a better angle of it, and that angle is going to allow you to see the two other hard drive trays, the one for the 3.5 and the one for the 2.5. We're going to be putting a 2.5-inch hard drive in this particular system today, but the steps for the 3.5 will be very similar. I also want to show you right here in this somewhat blurry photo, there's availability for one M.2 here and another M.2 right here. Now, this M.2 definitely looks like it'll take a larger form factor hard drive, where this one might want to be used for something more like a Wi-Fi card, or maybe even adapted into another PCI slot with some type of adapter later on. But that's my feeling. I think you definitely can get some type of hard drive in here if you're careful. So looking at our 2.5-inch bay, which is the one we're going to be putting our SSD in, I would be adding more drives to this video, but the drives I bought, being that I wanted to stay on the biggest budget I could, have taken a little bit longer than expected to arrive, and unfortunately it would delay this video by over a month, and I didn't want to wait that long to share this information with you. So we're releasing it today, or at least filming it today. So you're going to remove this Phillips head screw, which is going to release that tray, but this tray is going to be bound to that door piece by 4 tabs right in here, and you're going to gently pull towards the top of the door the whole tray and plastic piece to release it. Once you pull up, you'll get the door will look like this, and you can clearly see those 4 tabs that I talked about a minute ago. Fully assembled, here's the SSD and the tray all clipped together. I'm going to go ahead and push it against that door and push it back down against those 4 clips and insert the Phillips head screw, and then attach our SATA power cable, which is this black cable running from the motherboard, as well as our SATA data line. You can see that successfully done right here. And I tried to tuck them into this little wire management thing here. I definitely didn't get this done the best. I wasn't super happy with wire management on this system at all. I probably should have taken some more time, and I might go back and do this later on in here. But for now, I closed it up, putting the front face back on after I closed that door up. And I just showed you a nice close-up picture of that hinge that I spoke about earlier. And there's the back face back on. We're actually back at the same photo from the beginning. I didn't take another photo. The system's all ready now to start doing the installation of Proxmox, and I'll be back with you in just a few seconds. Your time to show you the process of how we're going to start installing Proxmox on this $200 budget HomeLab Proxmox server. So the first thing that needs to be done when you're installing Proxmox on your newly purchased server is going to be to download your image of Proxmox. And right now, as the production of this video, the image that you're going to download is Proxmox VE 8.1 ISO installer. And you're going to do that from the proxmox.com/en/downloads page. And you'll be able to find that just by going to proxmox.com and clicking on downloads. Once you get to that page, you're simply going to press download and save off your file to wherever you save your file. When your file has been downloaded, you can go ahead and get rid of your web browser. And I'm going to use some software called Banana Etcher to make my drive. You can use whatever other drive creation tool you want. I believe Rufus might be another one. So here is Etcher all up and running and installed. I didn't take you through the actual installation process of Etcher because I believe most of you have definitely installed software before, and we're on a Mac, and this may differ for Windows or will differ for Windows or Linux. So yeah, so with Banana Etcher all installed, we're going to go ahead and start by selecting our file. And then we're going to select our target, which is a USB drive that I've inserted into a USB port of my filming computer here. And we're just going to check it. And we're going to hit select, and then we'll hit flash. My system's going to ask me for my system password for the right to do this. And when this finishes, Etcher will go ahead and eject my drive and give me a message if something failed. So I'll be back with you once this drive is done being created, and we'll start looking at configuring BIOS for the next steps of installing Proxmox onto our M710S. So now that we have our USB drive, we inserted that into the back of the server as well as connecting our monitor, keyboard, and a mouse, even though we don't need it quite yet. So then we booted up the system by pressing the power key and rapidly tapping F1 until I got into the BIOS screen, which is the point we're at just right here. So now that we're at the BIOS screen, we can start configuring this system so we can install Proxmox on it. It had Windows on it before, and we're going to need to change some settings in order to install Proxmox. So over here at the security tab, we're going to be looking for some settings so we can configure secure boot. So I'm going to use arrow keys to move around here and move to the security tab, and then the down arrow key to move down to secure boot, where I'll press enter. And secure boot is enabled. I'm going to press enter again and disable that. That's going to allow me to boot into a different boot device, i.e. my flash drive that I created a moment ago. Now I can press the escape key, which will bring us back to the main BIOS page. And I'm going to need to move around a bit here as I look for the CPU setup page, and I'm going to need to enable some settings here. This Intel virtualization technology is disabled by default, and I want to go ahead and enable it. And what that's going to allow us to do is run virtual machines on this particular computer, which is the whole intent of Proxmox. The next thing I'm going to enable is not needed quite yet here for Proxmox, but is something that I was quite happy to find, and that's the VT-D support. And it displays a nice little help message that tells us that it's for I/O separation inside of VMs, and that's going to be great because that's the I/O MMU support that I talked about a few minutes ago. That's going to allow us to pass through PCI devices into VMs, such as video cards and Ethernet controllers, so we can isolate different PCI devices inside of VMs for tasks that we want to do. I can once again hit escape, and at this point I can exit and begin the boot process if I so wished. So to do that, I'm going to move over to exit, and I'm going to press enter with save changes and exit highlighted. And then I'm going to press enter again because yes, I want to save the configuration, and I'm going to begin rapidly tapping the F12 key. What that did for us is it brought up the boot controller that you see here, and it's going to allow me to select which device I want boot from inside of this system. And we're going to select our Memorex drive and press enter. Now, we see our Proxmox installation tool come up, and we're just going to select the Proxmox VE graphical installer. There's no need to use the terminal installer for this particular system. So we'll press enter. And as mentioned before, I've added a mouse for this part of the installation. It is not required. You can do it with a keyboard, but it makes the overall user experience of installing Proxmox a little bit better if you have a mouse. So we're going to go through, we're going to read this end user agreement. If we agree to everything, we'll click I agree. Then we're going to be asked to select the target hard drive. I reused a hard drive that I had sitting around here so I could make this video, as my hard drives I ordered are taking a little bit longer than expected to get here. But right here, you could select your target hard drive, and if you have multiple, you can click on it and select them. I don't have multiple here today. Also, if you wanted to use any other file systems that are supported by Proxmox, you can click options and you could select them here. We do have some videos on setting up ZFS if you would like to check that out. Today, for the simplest type of install, which is the plan for this budget homelabs server, we're going to be using ext4. So I'm going to press next at this point, and it's going to ask us to enter our country. I'm in the United States, so I'll start typing United States and select it when it comes up. For my time zone, I'll find the time zone closest to where I'm living. For me, that's going to be New York, and I'm going to use the US English keyboard layout. Now it's going to ask me for my system password, and for my email address, I'm just going to change invalid to com. If I've never really found any good use for this email address, I did read once about email notifications, but I've never tried or been successful in setting this up. Maybe later on in another video, we'll look into this a little bit more, as I do plan on using my other 3 systems to set up a cluster at some point. Right now, we'll hit next. And again, we're going to change that host name. Everything on my network is set up as local, so I'm going to change this to pv1.local. Then for my IP address, I'm going to change this to the IP range that I would like to work in. Personally, you could plug in a Ethernet cord, and some of this would be auto-filled, but remember, you want to set up your Proxmox server outside of your DHCP range that you've set up in your router so that you're not taking up one of those assigned addresses. In my setup on my router, I assign addresses 1 through 100, and then every address above 100 is available for me to set up as static IP addresses for projects and whatnot. We're going to set up this system today as 200, and then we're going to go down and we're going to configure my gateway. My gateway is 3.1. Most gateways are either ending in 254 or 1, but depending on your setup, that could vary. For DNS, it starts out as localhost. For the time being right now, I'm just going to use 1 dot, so I'll configure the address of 1.1.1.1. We can always change this later if we need. Now I'm going to just look over my configured settings, and if I'm happy with them, I'll press install, and Proxmox will start doing its thing and installing Proxmox. I will be back with you when this process has finished to show you what has happened. Now that the installation has finished, we can go ahead and remove that USB drive, and with the system restarting, we should start up into Proxmox. So when Proxmox starts up with a monitoring keyboard, this is what it looks like. It gives you the address to access the web interface. you definitely want to note that down and note that it says HTTPS because you're going to have to type that or your web browser won't allow you to view the correct page, and take note of the 8006 port number. So necessarily you'll want to type it into your web browser exactly as it's displayed here. For me, I'm going to need to move this system and connect it to internet or at least Ethernet so I can begin working with this. So I'm going to log in here by entering the username of root and the password that I configured during the installation. And then I'm going to enter the command shutdown. This will shut the system down by itself in an automated and safe process in about a minute. I'll be back with you at the web interface once this system has been moved to my network closet and reconnect. All right, so everything's up and running now in my network closet, and I've loaded in a web browser here. So we're ready to try logging into the web interface of our newly set up Proxmox server for the first time. We're going to start out by entering https:// and that IP address that we set up for the server. In my case, it's going to be 192.168.3.201, and then we're going to go add a colon and 8006 and press enter. This screen's telling us that we are using TLS or HTTPS, which is a security, and we have what's called an unsigned certificate. And that's because this certificate wasn't assigned by any certificate authority. This could be a warning in outside internet that this site is necessarily been spoofed, scammed, or scam site or something like that. And it's probably something that's not secure. In this case, this is just telling us that it's an unsigned certificate. The connection might not be private, and we should pay attention. Now, this is a server we've set up. We're self-hosting ourselves, so it's not a big deal. I'm using Brave here. Firefox or Chrome might be a little bit different, but here on Brave, we're going to press Advanced, and then we're going to click on Proceed. The other two are very similar. To log in for the first time, we're going to enter root, and then we're going to enter the password that we set up during the installation. With everything set up, we're now into our Proxmox server. And the first thing we're going to want to do before we do any more configuration inside of our Proxmox server is to select our server, scroll down to where it says updates, and under updates, if the dropdown isn't already open it and click on repositories. Inside of repositories, we're going to need to make some modifications. I'm going to close this drop down right here by clicking on the down arrow. It's not necessary, but it just gives me a little bit more room to show you what's going on. We're going to want to remove the enterprise repositories from this system unless we're planning to use it for an enterprise, but we can use this and get all the free updates we need for our home lab without paying that subscription. So to do that, we're going to highlight the PVE enterprise and we're going to press disable. We're also going to highlight the Ceph enterprise here, and we're also going to disable it. Now, we don't need to worry about Ceph. That's something for clusters and to get into more when we start building more complex networks with Proxmox, but what we're going to need to do is add the repository for PVE updates in. Now, like I said, this isn't going to be the enterprise ones that are tested and developed and known not to cause problems. These are going to be the no subscription ones, which what we're doing for the trade-off of getting these without paying Proxmox money is we're going to do some more testing on these. So it's not a bad trade-off for us home users that could experience a potential failure of our system. It's not a production system, so it's not going to take down the world. We're going to press add. It's going to give us this warning that we don't have a valid subscription. We know that, so we'll press OK. And under repositories, it defaults to the enterprise. We'll click on the drop down, we'll select no enterprise, and we'll press add. That's going to add the no subscription repositories to our list of repositories, and we can click reload. Now we can go up to updates, and right now there's nothing in our updates, but we can click on refresh. Again, it'll give us a warning message. We know this, so we'll hit OK, and it's going to check all the repositories and pull in any updates we have. Now we'll close this screen out, and it'll automatically show everything for us, and we can go ahead, click upgrade, and Proxmox is going to open a console window for us where it's going to do all of the upgrades that are available in our repository list, but we need to answer yes to it, giving it permission to do and install these upgrades. We'll do that by entering Y and then pressing enter, and this installation process will begin. I'll be back with you shortly when this is all finished. Okay, so this is what it looks like when Proxmox is done installing up all the updates. You can notice it brings us back to root at hostname, which we set up as PVE1. So we can close this screen out at this process, and it doesn't automatically refresh the screen, so it shows all of our updates, but what we can do is hit refresh and they'll all go away and it'll say there's none available. At this point, we have Proxmox up and running, and it's kind of usable at this point for creating VMs and containers, and we have many other videos on that. I'm not going to cover creating those videos in this demonstration, but what I do want to do is go ahead and kind of briefly show you how to get the firewall up and running, as well as how to get users created, because right now we're working on the root user. Unfortunately, due to the way Proxmox is configured, we are going to have to leave that root user account and not lock it completely out, but we can at least set up some settings inside of Proxmox so maybe the root user account is a little bit more secure. So I'll be back with you in a few minutes, my time, to walk you through the processes of how to create a new user account and what you want to do to try to secure that root user account a little bit better for yourself. So now we're going to create some user accounts in here. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select data center, and we're going to scroll down until we find users. At users, we're going to press add, and we're going to enter the username. For our case today, we're entering VE. There are some differences between Proxmox VE authenticated and Linux PAM authenticated. I'm not going to go into them for this video. We do have a more detailed video on users in our library, so you can go ahead and search that. If I'm able to, I will put a card above, but if not, they are available in our library. So we're selecting user PAM. For our groups, we're going to leave that blank. We'll have it never expire, and we don't need to fill in any of the information about first name, last name, or email account. So we can go ahead, press add, and let's quickly try logging out and logging back in as this user and see what it looks like. So we'll go up and log out, and we can enter VE. And right away, we find out we have a problem. We don't have a a password. We never set one up and we're unable to log in. So let's jump back in using root, highlight our account, click password, and set our password up. So this error message is telling us that Proxmox doesn't have a user account called VE. It's never been set up. And why that's never been set up is it's never been created in the actual command line. So we can go ahead and click OK, and we can close out of this. Then we can head to our server. We can press shell, and it's going to pop a window up that looks like this. This is our console shell window. And we can use the command add user, and we'll give it our username, press enter, enter our password, Y, and enter. This will create our user in the back end of the system so that we're able to now set it for the web interface. We'll close that. We'll head back to data center, head back to users, select our VE user, click passwords, and enter our password again. Now, I don't actually know if you have to enter that password again. I just always have done so. So now that we've created our password, let's go ahead and log out again and try logging in. Logging in, you can notice that all of our stuff for our server is missing. We have no actual setting options, and we really have no options under data center as well. And this is because this user has no permissions to do anything. So we're now able to log in, but we're going to have to go back to our root user to set up some more settings. At our root account under data center again, we're going to go down to roles, and we're going to just look. We're going to read through, see what roles we want. We want administrator. Then we're going to go to groups, and we're going to create a new group. We'll call it admin, and we're going to create it. Then we're going to select it, hit edit. Nope. Now that we're back inside of the root account, we can configure some more permissions for this VE user to have so it works more as an administrator and can do tasks inside of this server. We'll do that by clicking actually under permissions and then going to add, and we're going to use add user permissions, and we're going to add the /user permission, which is the everything permission for admin, and we're going to add it to the VE PAM. Under roles, we'll also select administrator. Then we'll press add and try logging out once again. Now, when we log in, we noticed we get all of our data center options right here, and we can look at our cluster health or our server health, as well as our server and our statistics on that, as well as firewall settings and whatnot. So now we have a administrative user other than root that we can use for tasks. So I talked a minute ago about adding some more security to that root user account that we had, and you might still be wondering when we're going to get to that or how we're going to do that. Well, I'm going to do that by adding something called 2FA, and I'm going to use a authenticator app on my cell phone. I'm using LastPass. I know some of you and many of you may not feel confidently about LastPass or any of their products, and that's fine. You're welcome to find any other authenticator app. Microsoft and other companies make them, but I use the LastPass authenticator app myself. To do this process, we're heading back users. We're going to select our user, or rather we're heading to permissions. And so to do this step, we're going to head to data center and two-factor authentication. We're going to press add. We're going to add something called TOTP. There are some other options here if you so choose, but we're going to set up TOTP today. So we're going to add TOTP, and it wants to add it for our VE account. So we'll have to head back to root. Again, press add TOTP. This time the user is going to be root at PAM, and it's going to give you a bunch of information here. What you're going to do is you're going to open your app, and you're going to tell your app that you want to scan a QR code, and you're going to scan that QR code that's in front of you. Your app should then automatically create a test code for you, which you're going to enter in this verify code box. You also need to fill out a description, and we'll press add. My code failed. I think it's the space. So I'm pressing add, and it worked. So now you're required to have two-factor authentication for that user. I would highly suggest that you also set it up for your other user, but that is entirely up to you. So now when we log out and we log in with root, we're asked to enter code. We can take that code from our app and enter it and get in. So we've added a layer of security to our root account, and we're able to lock down our Proxmox server a little bit better as far as our web interface. So the last part of your Proxmox home lab build setup is going to be to configure the firewall. And there's some really basic firewall rules that I like to put into my Proxmox server initially to get everything working. Later on, they're going to require some tweaks when we start self-hosting stuff, but as an initial for basically getting everything up and running, these are the rules that I apply to my Proxmox system. So where this is going to be a single node system, we're going to start out here under our server. Now we might, if this was a cluster, apply these rules a little bit differently. But to start applying firewall rules to our system, we're going to start out under our server and go to firewalls. Then we're going to click add, and we're going to add in a rule which is going to stop us from going and blocking ourselves out of our web interface. So we're going to take incoming traffic, and our action is going to be to accept, and we're going to accept that traffic coming in on port 8006, which is the port our web interface works on. And we can enable this rule. We could also add a comment here so we know what's going on of something like interface, and it's telling us that we missed a protocol. This is going to be TCP, so we'll select that and we'll click on add. That's going to create a rule for us that's going to allow incoming traffic for the web interface. The next rule we're going to create is another add rule, and it's also going to be TCP, but this is going to be for SSH, which is port 22. So now we have the ability to SSH into our server to reset things, to work on it if we need to, and we have the ability to interact with it with our web interface. The next two rules I'm going to create block all other traffic into this server. So we're going to create a rule. It's going to be incoming traffic in a direction. We're going to change accept to drop, and we're going to select TCP and of course enable. Now we want to take this rule, drag it to the bottom of the list, because what happens is our server reads this list in order. So it's going to go from the top. Does this rule apply? Then it's going to read, does this rule apply? Then it'll read, does this rule apply? So the last rule we'll create is one for UDP. So we'll drop UDP traffic, and we'll also move that one to the bottom. Now, at this moment, you'll notice that things have still been working, and we could even still SSH into our server. If I bring up terminal and we tried SSHing in, you'll notice that we can get in. So if I was to exit this, and we'll clear it for just a minute, and I uncheck the accept SSH traffic, we would expect the system to not allow SSH traffic in. But in trying our window or trying our SSH, we're going to find that it still allows traffic and allows us to connect. So you might be asking what's going on and why I was so willy-nilly with accepting those drop rules when I knew they would apply to the top of this list. And the reason being is if firewall isn't activated on the levels above where you're adding the rule, no rules will apply. And by default, Proxmox installs with the data center firewall settings not applied. So in order to enable that, we're going to go to data center and we'll find firewall inside of data center. But instead of going to firewall and creating rules, we're going to go to options and we're going to change firewall from no to yes, and this will apply the firewall settings. Now, back here, we're still able to interact with the web interface, but going over to terminal, we'll find that we're no longer able to establish an SSH connection with this server because the firewall has been turned on. So we'll quickly just press Control C and stop that from happening, and we'll head back to our session and we'll check to turn on the SSH rule to allow everything to work. And then we'll try that SSH again, and we're able to log in. So there you have it. There is my basic $200 budget Proxmox server build and setup. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and you're now able to get using Proxmox and experiencing Proxmox for yourself. Drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of this video. It was definitely a little bit longer than most of mine before. So I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any other great budget Proxmox systems to suggest, please go ahead and suggest them for our viewers. I think this would be very informative when people are looking for servers, especially when they're looking to start out in the Proxmox world. As always, have a good night and keep on learning.